Hey everyone, and welcome to this Explainer. Today we're diving into a situation where global pop culture totally collided with fierce political debate. We are talking about Ireland's 2024 Eurovision controversy. We're going to unpack exactly how a highly anticipated musical performance practically morphed overnight into a massive national debate. A debate that dragged in international relations, the core mandates of public broadcasting, and some seriously intense public protests. We'll look at how this whole row started, who the key players were, and why this one singular cultural moment actually matters on a global scale.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this, we've got to look at the comprehensive chronicle of Ireland's Eurovision discord. Right at the epicenter of this controversy was Ireland's representative, Bambi Thug, and the immense, and I mean immense, public pressure put on the national broadcaster, RTE, to outright boycott the 2024 contest in Malmö, Sweden. The absolute core of this conflict? It all stemmed from the inclusion of Israel in the competition amid the ongoing war in Gaza. What literally started as a few localized petitions spread like wildfire into a multifaceted crisis that challenged the very idea that a music contest could be apolitical. We're going to map out this entire landscape, from the initial song selection all the way to the lasting political fallout.
Okay, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the timeline of the discord. Second, supporters versus the critics. Third, reactions, home and abroad. Fourth, media and social media. And finally, politics and what's next.
Let's kick things off by establishing the ground-level facts with Section 1, Timeline of the Discord.
So how did we actually get here? It really breaks down into three distinct phases. Phase 1 kicks off in January 2024. That's when Bambi Thug won the Eurosong special on The Late Late Show with the track Doomsday Blue. But almost immediately, the spark for this discord was lit, because viewers started realizing the upcoming contest would include Israel. Then we hit Phase 2, which covers the spring escalation. This is when multiple petitions started circulating, quickly grabbing thousands of signatures, and explicitly demanding that RTE pull out of the competition. We saw public figures and activist groups dialing up the pressure day by day. And finally, Phase 3. This marks the absolute climax in May, right during the Eurovision period, in Malmö itself. The tension just hit a boiling point. We're talking missed rehearsals, formal complaints lodged directly to the European Broadcasting Union over commentary, and huge disputes over pro-Palestinian messages written in Ogham makeup right on the artist's body.
Now, amidst all this mounting pressure, what exactly was Ireland's official position? Well, RTE held firm that it's a public service broadcaster and a member of the European Broadcasting Union. Their official stance was essentially, look, Eurovision is a non-political music event, and we participate as a broadcaster, not as a political entity that represents the state's foreign policy. And the Irish government actually backed up that institutional boundary. Both the former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and his successor Simon Harris came out and stated that unilateral cultural boycotts are generally ineffective and that RTE ultimately makes its own independent programming decisions. So that was the definitive baseline, and it's exactly what fueled the massive public divide that followed.
Which naturally leads us to ask, how did the public react to that stance? Let's move to Section 2, Supporters versus the Critics.
This wasn't just a mild disagreement. Both sides were fiercely passionate and mounted some incredibly robust defenses. On one hand, supporters of participating argued for the power of presence. They believed that having Bambi Thug there as a non-binary artist brought absolutely vital representation to a massive global stage. They felt that actually going to Malmö gave the artist a chance to speak out directly, show solidarity of Palestinians, and challenge the status quo from the inside rather than just being silenced by a boycott. But on the flip side, the critics argued that participating inherently legitimized the event, completely ignoring calls from Palestinian civil society for a global boycott. For them, withdrawing was the only morally consistent action. They heavily pointed to the historical precedent of the EBU banning Russia back in 2022 after the invasion of Ukraine, arguing that refusing to apply that exact same standard here made participating completely unacceptable.
So, how did those opposing arguments actually play out in the real world? Let's check out Section 3, Reactions at Home and Abroad.
The contrast here is wild. At home in Ireland, the reaction was intensely polarized. You literally had hundreds of people staging protests right outside RTE headquarters in Dublin, creating this deeply fractured national mood. But simultaneously, domestic viewership for the final was absolutely massive, pulling in the highest ratings they'd seen in years. The conversation domestically was aggressive and heavily focused on Irish national identity and taxpayer money. But step outside of Ireland, and the reaction took a totally different shape. The international Eurovision fandom largely praised Ireland for delivering its most avant-garde, highest-scoring performance in over 20 years. Meanwhile, though, international broadcasters and the EBU were looking at Ireland's internal discord as a massive geopolitical headache. They were scrambling behind the scenes just trying to manage the political statements and keep the broadcast focused entirely on the music.
Of course, all of this was heavily fueled by where people were getting their information. That brings us to Section 4, Media and Social Media.
Traditional journalistic outlets established a very specific narrative here. They focused heavily on the structural mechanics of the row. Newspapers and evening TV broadcasts were detailing official EBU press releases, parsing through statements from the Taoiseach, and reporting on the logistical and security nightmares happening on the ground in Malmö. Basically, traditional media framed the whole story as a diplomatic crisis and a massive test of RTE's editorial independence under fire.
But hop over to social media, and you're looking at a completely different universe. If traditional media was the structured filter, social media was the raw, unedited battleground. Hashtags demanding an outright boycott were trending every single day. Unofficial clips of Bambi Thug's super tense press conferences and backstage interactions were being dissected frame by frame on TikTok and Twitter. The digital debate just moved at lightning speed, with algorithms actively boosting the highest emotions from both the fiercest critics and the most passionate supporters. It amplified the discord in a way that an evening news broadcast just couldn't contain.
All of this friction is definitely going to leave a lasting mark. Let's zoom out for our final section, politics and what's next.
So what are the real-world political implications here? The absolute biggest one is that the EBU's long-standing mandate that Eurovision is a strictly non-political event has essentially been shattered, and this forces a serious reckoning for public service broadcasters all over the continent. Institutions like RTE are now caught in a really tough structural bind. They're bound by international broadcasting agreements, sure, but they're also entirely reliant on the goodwill of a domestic public that increasingly sees cultural participation as a direct endorsement of foreign policy. If this row proved anything, is that you just can't separate national values from a global entertainment stage when the stakes get this high.
Which leaves us with one unavoidable question. What happens next? We've just explored how a single song contest managed to fracture a nation, testing the absolute limits of public broadcasting, political neutrality, and digital activism. The illusion of an apolitical Eurovision? Yeah, that's gone. So, how will Ireland and its broadcaster navigate these deeply polarized waters next year? Are the rules of international cultural participation about to change entirely? The groundwork has been laid, but the true legacy of this historic discord is still being written right now. I highly encourage you to keep this explainer in mind as the story continues to unfold. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep asking those great questions.